Today we have James Nobles, my good friend, and anybody who likes anything about what we do here at King Law should automatically like what James does. We've taken so many of his ideas over the years, and for the people who don't know, and I don't know if even Bree knows this, one of the very first people I ever told I was leaving the government to go into private practice was James, and I met with him, and I have asked him hundreds, if not thousands, of questions over the course of the last.
It's slowed down. In the early years, it was daily, but now it's maybe once a month.
Yeah, correct. So James Nobles, criminal defense lawyer, sometimes civil attorney, but a true professional lawyer and really a professional in all regards, in my opinion. And we're really happy to have him here and talk. I could just ask James questions forever because he's a brilliant attorney and a good person. So I think the biggest thing, if I could introduce James, is this is the guy who's won more murder trials than anybody I know. Maybe Joe D'Amelio's won a bunch. He's done a bunch. But tell us a little about your practice.
Yeah, so I, these days, there's a lot of white-collar defense, but there's still some more traditional criminal defense work. I'm going to try my 25th murder trial in February coming up. Of the 24 I've tried, I've won 14 of them, so that's a pretty good record. I don't know anybody else who has that percentage of wins. And, of course, as you know, if you've tried 24 murder trials, you've literally tried hundreds, if not thousands, of other types of cases, which we've certainly done. And over the years, it has sort of transitioned from assigned counsel cases, then into retained private cases, which give you the resources to potentially, do a better job, have investigators and experts and those sorts of things. And now, my practice in terms of volume of number of clients is really pretty small. I might have somewhere between 10 and 20 clients at a time, but almost all of those cases are boxes upon boxes upon boxes, right? So having been a graduate of business school before I went to law school, or had a degree in business before I went to law school, and coming from a family of entrepreneurs, I'm kind of drawn to the paper cases at this point: economic crimes, Ponzi schemes, tax evasions, all those sorts of things. A lot of lawyers want to shy away from that because it's complicated and intellectual, and there's a lot of documentation to go through. But I've sort of thrived on that. And so many of my cases now involve money laundering or tax evasion or wire fraud, bank fraud, all those sorts of things. I did a case involving OneCoin, which was a purported cryptocurrency company, but was really the world's largest Ponzi scheme. And the founders stole $4 billion from thousands and thousands and thousands of investors all over the world. And I represented, I represented an attorney who was accused of laundering $450 million of the $4 billion. I was one of 3 lawyers who worked on that case, and that is still being litigated even now in terms of he was convicted of some counts at trial. It appears as though we may get a new trial because one of the government witnesses materially lied on the stand. And there was some Brady evidence. For those who don't know, Brady is the type of evidence where it actually would show your client didn't commit the crime. And so what the co-conspirator, the other witness lied about was something that actually would prove our client's innocence or lack of knowledge in the scheme. So that's a case that is still going on now. So that's kind of a lot of what I'm dealing with these days, although I still do murders and guns and drugs like we all do. But over the time, it's really morphed into more of the paper cases.
So I want to ask you a little. You had a big trial last year where you were in a different seat.
Yes.
You were the prosecutor, and tell us a little about how that happened. And
how does that happen?
So I had never, although I tried 7 jury trials as a DA, and I was only a DA for 2 years. I had never tried a murder as a DA. I think the most serious charge that I tried as a district attorney was a guy who went in and lied about his identity at DMV. So falsifying business records, or I don't know, it was like a D felony or something. And a garage burglary was my other most serious trial as a prosecutor. So after 18 years of being a defense attorney, I had actually read an article in the paper about a case where a current assistant district attorney's father had been murdered, and they appointed someone to represent the state because the DA's office had a conflict, obviously. And I found that article very interesting, and it kind of stuck in my mind. About 3 months later, I got a call from a judge's clerk who used to be a DA with you and I, and said, the judge just wanted me to reach out to you and see if you might be interested in accepting this assignment. And because I had known about the case and the articles I read, I said yes immediately on the spot without thinking about it very much, which at the time I had no idea how much of an endeavor it was going to be. But I'm glad I did it. We ultimately, there was another attorney assigned who is the elected DA from Yates County, Todd Casella, someone you know. And it was really, I got to know Todd very, very well. We worked hundreds of hours on the case. I put over 400 hours in the case. I'm sure Todd had a couple hundred hours in the case. It was a 2-week trial, a very contentious trial, one that had some level of media attention, especially during COVID. That was kind of rare. And we got a conviction in the first couple hours of jury deliberation. So it was really interesting to think exactly the opposite way that you've been thinking for the last 18 years.
So take us through it, though, a little bit. You have your, sometimes we call them true believer defense lawyers. Mm-hmm. And you have your prosecutors, and they're going to be prosecutors till the day they die, and they're going to be defense lawyers till the day they die. And you are obviously not that, because you're doing both things this year.
Well, I would have said that I was that true believer defense attorney, to be honest with you.
Well, you were an assistant district attorney first.
Right. And even then, when I took the job at the, and this may be part of my story you don't know, when I took the job at the Monroe County DA's office, I had actually applied at 3 other places to be a public defender. And I didn't get any of those jobs. So ultimately, I decided that, I knew certainly that many prosecutors go on to be significant defense attorneys. So I decided, well, this is a job opportunity I have. The opportunity is here. Those other doors closed for a reason. So why don't I go learn everything I can learn there, knowing that I'm ultimately going to be a defense attorney. So when I started at the DA's office here, I knew that, I was expecting to only be there a couple years before I went out to do what I'm ultimately doing now. So I would have said, that I was one of those defense attorneys who would always be a defense attorney. But I guess after 18 years, it was novel and interesting to do something different. And it was a case that I really believed in. I obviously knew the ADA, who it was his father. I had known him from being a defense attorney. And oddly enough, I had never met his father, but I am close friends with 2 people who are close friends of his. So I think for all of those reasons, it was a more natural fit than it would have otherwise been.
Well, I think you got to pick the case, too. This was a case. You chose to be a prosecutor on this case.
Yes.
Not the next 200 files that got thrown on your desk as a prosecutor, right, and a boss telling you
correct
how they would be prosecuted.
And I knew that being a special prosecutor is a little bit unusual. There was no one who could tell me what to do, right? So there was no supervisor in the DA's office that would tell me, you need to get this disposition, or I want you to handle the case in this way. When you're the special prosecutor, you can literally do whatever it is you want to do. You can try the case your way. You can make an offer if you want. We did make an offer. It was rejected by the defendant. And so, I knew I wasn't going to have a supervisor, if you will. And I also knew enough about the case from talking to the prior special prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the judge's clerk that it was going to be a very technical case, meaning there was a lot of phone records, geodata, videos, GPS coordinates. It was going to be a very technical case in terms of the way the evidence came in. There was no eyewitness, right? So it wasn't going to be a case where you traditionally have your eyewitness for the murder, or you have a confession to the murder, or the murder is itself on video. So I knew that this was going to be piecing together a lot of elements, and I thought that the different types of evidence we had, also financial records, medical records, autopsy report, all of the technical stuff we had made it really appealing to me that this was going to be a little more interesting than calling a witness to say, yeah, that guy over there is the one who did it. I saw it, right? So I thought it was going to be a unique challenge, an interesting challenge, and it was.
And I know you mentioned Todd. We always mention Todd. He's one of our buddies.
Yeah. And
how'd you end up with Todd? And tell us a little about working with him.
So I met Todd originally through you, and have known him for a little bit as being the DA in Yates County. We had socialized some together. I knew Todd is the youngest elected DA in the state. I knew he was a hard worker. I knew he knew the technical side of evidence. He's very computer-oriented and technology-oriented. So when I knew I had to have a second person on this and it needed to be someone who was an assistant district attorney or a district attorney, Todd was my first choice. And basically the court told me I could, as long as I could get someone to agree, I could pick whoever I wanted, as long as they were an ADA somewhere. And I called Todd and explained to him what was going on, and he, like me, immediately said yes. He had said to me, when am I ever going to get a chance to do a case with a defense attorney again, right? So,
Yeah, it's a
so he
unique opportunity.
Yeah, it was a unique opportunity. So he jumped on that, and I mean, our friendship has deepened dramatically as a result of that. I would say Todd's a very close friend of mine now. He's someone I knew before. He's a close friend of mine now. I mean, we went through. I mean, you've tried cases with people before. Yeah. You talk strategy, you talk how you're going to implement it, you talk about the jurors, you talk about the case, and it was really. He and I have very different skill sets and a very different perception on the world. He is definitely a dyed-in-the-wool prosecutor, for sure. So it was, we had our conflicts at times about, when I wanted to make an offer, he didn't like the number I wanted to make, but, we kind of worked through those issues. But largely, I think we were very complimentary of each other. And, it was interesting when it came time to talk about the trial, we were calling 40-something witnesses. We decided that it made sense for him to handle everybody who's in law enforcement, because that's what he always does. And in this particular case, there was a lot of unsavory characters. So, drug users, drug dealers, people with extensive criminal histories, prostitutes. And so, given what I do for a living, it was sort of more a natural fit for me to work with those witnesses, because I can build rapport with them and I understand kind of where they're coming from, and, the same way that we build rapport with our clients. So that division worked really, really well. And I think that kind of bore out in how quickly the jury came back.
Well, do you think being a prosecutor in that case and being a defense attorney, normally you're thinking, as you're building this case, you're like, what would I do if I was defending this guy?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. And it's part of the reason I put so many hours in, because I looked at the case, what we had from law enforcement. There was 3 different law enforcement agencies involved: Brighton Police Department, Irondequoit Police Department, and the New York State Troopers. And I found a number of holes, like a lot of holes. So I said to myself, okay, what can we do to close those holes? So the whole time, from the time I was assigned the case in August and got delivered 3 boxes of paperwork, right, until we tried the case last April, we were consistently trying to discover and fill the holes, right? And again, I think that's why the jurors came back so quickly, is that I think we prevented a lot of their escape routes, or a lot of places they'd like to take the case, we walled it off so they couldn't go there. So, I think that worked well. What was interesting is now, first of all, I know about a lot of technology in a more intimate way than I did before that law enforcement has available to them. Because when we were doing this case, given a variety of factors, we had access to different parts of the state troopers that do undercover work and do technological stuff. We had access to the U.S. Secret Service and some currency tracing that was important to the case, and some banking things that I didn't know about. And so I learned about all these things that the government can do that I had no idea.
Which now you can apply.
Right, or now you at least know they might be doing that to us, right?
Or you can say to the cop, hey,
did you do that?
You could have done this and you chose
right,
not to. And you
right,
could have
right,
done this and you
right,
chose not
exactly.
to. There's some good cross there.
And so the other part of that was, I've always had a pretty good rapport with law enforcement, but, there's now people who I've become even closer with as a result of that, like the lead detective and some other folks who are really involved in the case. So the law enforcement was great with me. I think when I was first assigned, they were a little standoffish, because all of them had been up against me in one way or another at some point in time. But it didn't take long, to build a rapport with them, and we worked pretty seamlessly and developed a lot of good relationships there. So,
are you still representing RPD or
I
Locust,
do, yeah.
Locust Club?
Yeah, so I represent the Rochester Police Department Locust Club, which is their union. And anytime an officer fires their gun at work, in a use of force or any other significant use of force, I represent them until basically the criminal, if there is a criminal investigation, is closed. That, as you may know, in April of last year, became exclusively the jurisdiction of the Attorney General's office. So, given some of the things that have happened with the AG's office in the past, those cases now drag out a lot longer than they used to. And there's more work that we need to do to make sure that those officers are protected, just like any other person who's being investigated by the authorities.
So what's that like? You're defending folks that these people arrest every day.
Yeah.
You've probably cross-examined most of them, or
Yeah.
at least a lot of them.
Some of them, yeah, for sure.
And then they're like, okay, but when push comes to shove and their ass is on the line, they want the best guy.
Yeah, and I think you have to do that, right? Because if you didn't pick someone who has the experience that I have, or you have, or Joe D'Amelio has, you're getting a civil lawyer to represent you in a criminal action. And so I think they became fairly uneasy with that concept, especially, as the Attorney General's office came in and the spectacle that I wouldn't say they made it all on their own, but the spectacle that the Daniel Prude case became, where we have 8 officers are suspended. One of the officers wasn't even there, right? And was still suspended for a year, okay? And ultimately, after a grand jury presentation, all of the officers are cleared. The mayor still decides she wants to fire one of them, but never does it because she has her own problems at that point. And so, I think there's a lot of question as to whether, I think law enforcement has a lot of questions about whether they're going to be given a fair shake with the Attorney General's office. So we're taking all of those cases very seriously as they come through at this point.
You only got to screw it up once and ruin somebody's life.
That's right.
Good
That's
police
right.
officer
That's right.
goes down if you don't do your work.
That's right. Yeah.
So you have a very successful record and you're a great trial attorney. What do you think sets you apart and makes you successful? What?
I think it's 2 things. I would never tell anyone that I'm the smartest lawyer out there. I think the reason that I win more than other people win is that I generally out-prepare my opponent. I do all the work there is to do. We look under every rock, turn over every leaf. We do extensive investigations in every case. And I also think that at the end of the day, this is a job about talking to people. This is essentially a glorified sales job.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective.
You are trying to sell a prosecutor to make you an offer. You're trying to sell a judge to approve the offer. You're trying to sell jurors on whatever it is. When you start a jury trial, you have a pretty good idea of what your defense is, or at least you should. You have a pretty good idea of how the evidence is going to come in. So I think the last step is picking jurors that are inclined to buy your product, right?
Okay.
So, for instance,
how do you know how to pick the best?
Yeah, that
takes time,
that's an art
skill?
and a science and luck, frankly, too. But if you think of it sort of like a used car lot, the person who's going to buy a full-size Tahoe is very different than the person who's going to buy the Prius, right?
Yes.
So you need to sort of figure out what it is you have. Do you have a full-size Tahoe or do you have a Prius? Mm-hmm. And once you know what you've got, right, what your defense is, and so to get more specific about that, maybe your defense is, this guy's the wrong person. He wasn't ID, they can't ID him, or the ID of him isn't very good. Then you may want witnesses who understand science and recollection and how someone could make that sort of a mistake and question a lot of things, right? If you have a self-defense case, like, yes, my client shot this guy and killed him, but he did it because he was about to get killed himself, you might want a very different juror. Mm-hmm. Now you're looking for a juror who maybe believes in the Second Amendment, a gun owner, things of that nature. So if you know what it is that what your product is, you try to select people based on what they tell you, based on your observations of them, based on social science. You try to select people that are going to be more sympathetic towards your case,
okay,
right? And so I think those are the 3 elements, right? You outwork your opponent, you know how to talk to people, and you pick the people who are going to like your product. And if you can do that, especially if you can do it better than your opponent, you've got an advantage. Now, sometimes the facts are unsurmountable, right? So
if there's a murder on HD video, that's tough to defend.
It's tough to defend, right?
Your guy gets pulled over with a kilo of cocaine riding shotgun, that's tough to defend.
Exactly. So, it doesn't mean that you can do it, but it means that you're employing everything you have available to you to try to get the best result possible for your client. And, Bob knows this well, too. One of the reasons that you win trials is that you avoid trying cases you're going to lose. Under that scenario,
right,
there's a murder on HD video or there's a kilo of cocaine in the passenger seat, you say to your client, hey, look, we got to try to get the best situation we can here.
So would you say you won 14? If you tried 50, you probably still would have won 14.
Yeah, right, right, exactly. I mean, because there are cases that you don't really have a great shot at. Now, murders can be tough, right, because often there is no offer. So now you have nothing to lose, right? So those cases are a little bit different. And sometimes there's other cases of a political nature, I don't mean involving politicians, but like right now, they've arrested this quote-unquote Park Ave rapist, right? In this political climate at this moment in time, that's going to be a very difficult case to resolve, right? As opposed to end up going to trial. So, sometimes you're forced into trying a case, but, generally we know, look, if you've got, a kilo of cocaine in the passenger seat when the cop walks up, we probably ought to figure out what's the least amount of time you can get and move on, right?
Right.
So I don't know if I want to get a little into your background.
Sure.
Because I think it's really interesting and something I've talked about before on here is you have these different lawyers who, at least the lawyers who I respect, and you're one of them, and Judge Kitty is always one of my favorites.
Sure.
And I grew up in the country. You grew up in the country. She grew up in the country. But tell us a little about your background, just generally, and kind of how that led you to being a really successful trial attorney. And people probably don't know you live in a big house in Brighton now with a fancy car and all that stuff.
Right.
But
so I grew up in Conesus, New York, in the middle of nowhere. It was probably 6 or 7 miles to the closest grocery store. That wasn't an ideal environment for me. I didn't really like that. Most of my life was focused on how to get someplace more metropolitan or more urban. And I, was not an exemplary student as a kid. So until I got to law school, my grades were average at best. So I bounced around from, community college to regular college. And, I think by the time I graduated, I went to 5 or 6 schools. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm one of 4 kids. My second oldest brother, I'm the youngest, went to prison when I was like 8 years old. And I think that experience, what that did to my family, sort of the domino effect of things that happened there, kind of was one of the things that led me in this direction. But I think there were other motivators too, including, I like the fact that there's a winner and a loser in this business, right? It's a very competitive business. I like the fact that you can make a decent living in this business. I like the fact that it can, sort of transcend you out of your rural roots if that's what you want to do. So, I think there was a lot of appealing things to it for me. By the time I graduated college, I thought, I can't go to school anymore. I'm done with school, no more school. And then I went out in the real world and worked for a couple years, and I was ready to go back to school.
Yeah.
Just for me, and just for me, I think what you said just kind of struck a nerve with me is I grew up pretty rural myself, and it's the same set of rules. If you're a trust fund kid or you're a kid from the country, you go in the courtroom, the rules are the rules.
Absolutely.
And if you can convince those 12 people or that judge that you're right, you prepare,
right?
You can win.
Absolutely.
And that's fun for me, and it's fun for you too.
Right, absolutely.
What do you enjoy the most?
I enjoy helping people. I think that's a critical part of it, especially when they want the help and they're trying to help themselves too. I enjoy winning. That's absolutely part of it.
I feel like the thrill of a trial.
It is an adrenaline rush in a way that I've never experienced in anything else. One of my pastimes, one of my hobbies is racing cars.
Oh.
But the adrenaline rush is not as strong
really?
in racing a car as it is waiting for a jury to return a verdict.
Wow.
The one thing that's the same about them both is that when you are doing it, you cannot be distracted by any other thing. And that's what I like about both of them. So if you're in the race car turning a lap at Watkins Glen and there's cars around you, it is not possible for your mind to wander, because you're thinking about how are you at the right speed in this particular point? When do I have to brake? Who's next to me? Who's in front of me? There's too many moving pieces to let your mind go anywhere other than what you're doing right there. And being on trial is sort of the same. Right? Because whether you are listening to a witness testify or you're cross-examining a witness, that is your sole focus. You can't be distracted by anything. You have to, because you may know what their report said, you may know what their grand jury testimony said, but they may not say the same thing here today. So, it is critically important that you're 1,000% focused in those moments. So there's that similarity, but the adrenaline rush is beyond anything else I've ever done, whether that's, rock climbing or, last Thanksgiving, my daughter and I went on the outside of the CN Tower where you can walk around on the outside at the top.
Yeah.
But none of those things are the same as waiting for a jury.
feel like there have to be crazy moments in trials. Are there any, do you know or can think of any crazy moments that you're like, I didn't even see that coming?
So, yeah, I mean, I've had certainly one acquittal that I was just blown away by. I was like totally shocked that they acquitted my client. I mean, I was trying not to let my jaw hit the table. So, I mean, it was it was a robbery case where a couple of guys had gone to a shady car dealership and bought a car in cash, and then 2 hours later they went back with ski masks on or whatever to rob the cash that they had paid for the car with, right? And my guy at the time had an ankle bracelet on, and back then there was only like, I want to say maybe 20 people in Rochester with an ankle bracelet. So the parole took this book of all the pictures of people with an ankle bracelet over to the guys who got robbed, and they opened it up, and out of 20 they picked my guy. And they came in and testified. This is what they. Now, I cross-examined them a lot about running a shady business, not declaring the money to the IRS, but you know,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that's not the guy.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so at the end, the jury acquitted him, and I was like, whoa.
Sure glad I asked that question.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Well,
Yeah.
that's the craziest cases, but are there any cases, I always love asking this question, is there any case that's really impactful to you that you hold to your heart close?
yeah. So in 2010, I defended a guy named Darren Venable who was charged with murder. He was involved in a fight at a fraternity party at the University of Rochester, and he unfortunately killed his classmate. He was acquitted in self-defense. It was a very contentious case. It was a case where the families on both sides were very invested in the trial. And when we got a not guilty verdict, a lot of people in the audience actually got arrested for their level of outburst and outbreak and
gosh.
behavior. And, you know, it was a case where I really tracked with my client over the years, and I did it with my partner, Brian DeCarlis. We weren't partners at the time, but, and then a couple years ago, we actually went to his wedding in Long Island. So, I mean, just a great family, a great result for someone who I truly believe deserved the result, and someone who's gone on to do great things with his life after. You know, a lot of people, even if they're acquitted, sometimes can't get beyond the stigma of having been charged, or, you know, and one of the things that's frustrating, and I'm sure you've seen this too, you can be acquitted, but Google still has all the news stories.
Right.
Right? And and Darren Venable is a fairly unique name.
Yeah.
So he had a very, very difficult time, even though he graduated from a prestigious university with a great GPA. He started off working in the FedEx store because it was the only job he could get. And then over time, you know, he worked his way up to now he's a headhunter, a corporate headhunter in a very prestigious agency. But it took a long time for that to happen. Certainly a lot longer than it should have.
Yeah.
But for this incident, so.
And there's nothing that people can do to kind of, I mean, the news articles are news articles,
Right. I mean,
right?
you
can't remove them.
Right. You can reach out to each agency and ask them to remove the article. My experience has been most of them won't do it.
Okay.
Right. Because they were arrested. They were charged.
Right.
They did have a trial. They were acquitted. So all of that coverage, right,
It's true.
is
It's
not inaccurate.
Public knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you don't really have much of a leg to stand on,
Right.
you know, to have it removed.
Yeah. It kind of sucks because in some way
does.
you are, like, you're still convicted in some sort of way. 'Cause
Right.
The public is going to see it that way.
And it had real consequences for Darren. Like he had been an ROTC student, but he was not able to get into the military. He was not able to get in the New York City Fire Department, all as a result of that case, even though he was acquitted. So there's still challenges for people, even if they are successful at trial, right?
So there's a guy that you and I were friends with, and you more than me, and but your early career. Talk a little about Tom Cacuzzi, and your days when you were a new defense lawyer and people didn't know you,
Sure.
who you were.
Yeah, so when I left the DA's office after 2 years, it happened kind of quickly. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. And Tom Cacuzzi was a pillar of the defense community at that point in time. For those who don't know, he represented Arthur Shawcross.
And was just a damn good guy.
Yeah, a really good guy, a really good lawyer. Till the day he died, he still did assigned counsel work. He represented the indigent as well as his paying clients. He had a number of high-profile cases over the years, and Tom was good enough to take me in when I left the DA's office, and I worked in an office with him for the first 5 years. we had our own cases, but he was always there to answer a question. He was always there to give advice.
You tell us a Conesus story, though. I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have a few.
Well, my favorite was, or one of my favorites about Tom is that, he smoked till the day he died. Okay, even indoors. So he had his office, and he had taken plexiglass and put it inside the return vents so that no smoke could get sucked out of his office into the other rooms. And he would, depending on the wind, he would have one window open or closed or whatever. He literally took smoking Marlboros to an art, where he would have this window open there, close this vent here, so that the neighbors wouldn't complain when they smell smoke in the hallway. So he was always analyzing and thinking about things. He also he had a great trial down in Livingston County where a young man was accused of menacing a police officer. There were some DEC officers who were patrolling a particular area during hunting season, and the claim was that Tom's client pointed the gun at him and threatened him with it essentially, but didn't say anything, which was sort of odd. So they went to trial, and the judge said to Tom, he goes, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because I really don't want to put your client in prison. He's a really young kid with no record." And he goes, "Well, you better hope I win then." and ultimately he did. So it was, he really had, what I liked about him, especially, he was 67 when he passed, but, in those later years as he got older, he sort of had the opinion, he was like, "I'm so old, no one can do anything to me, so I really don't give a shit. I'm just going to tell them how I feel." So that was really, he would tell judges when he thought they were wrong. He would, especially after he knew he had cancer, I think it gave him a little liberty to really push the envelope. Which
I had a case with him. I was a prosecutor. I had a case with him. I was a young prosecutor out in Greece Town Court. And, you file an omnibus motion as a defense lawyer, and you got all this stuff in there.
Right.
Well, I get a motion from Conesus, one paragraph. And so we get out to court. I answer whatever it is. I'm like, "Tom, why'd you file this motion?" He goes, "Well, all the other stuff I don't deserve to win, but this I should win. So I figured I would just write the important part." And the judge says kind of like, "Tom, why is your motion only a page?" He goes, "Judge, that's all I need. I'm right about this." And he got it dismissed.
Yeah. Tom was an incredible guy.
Well, all right. So we have a lot of law students that listen
Sure.
to us.
Yeah.
I know that you talked about picking a jury, but is there any other advice that you would give to a law student?
Be successful? Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we've all been to law school. We know our classmates who've done different things, and I have a niece who's a young lawyer, and it's if you read anything about being a lawyer, there's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of people who don't stick with it. I think you have to find an area of law that you love and do that, because it's the only way you're going to persevere in this career, because it is hard and it is stressful and it is difficult. It's the only way that it's going to be lucrative for you, because if you love it, you're probably going to become good at it. And it's the only way that you really are going to be fulfilled, right? So for me personally, negotiating a contract so a multinational corporation makes an extra $100,000, don't really care.
Doesn't do it for you.
Doesn't do it for me. If I can save someone from going to prison, that, if I can save a life, essentially, that is something that really lights me up. And so here's one thing that very few people know, because it's just in the works. I'm actually starting an executive LLM in tax in January. And so an LLM is an advanced law degree. You have to get a law degree, a JD, before you can get an LLM. There's LLMs in a variety of areas, but the two that are really common are tax and patent, because they're pretty complicated. And so the one thing that's really lighting me up more now than has in the past is these white collar cases that I was talking about. And there's almost always a tax consequence along with those cases. And I recently, for someone I've known for a period of time, they came to me and said, "Hey, look, I've got a mess. I got audited by the IRS. We tried to defend ourselves in the audit. They say we owe $138,000. I don't have $138,000. I don't know what to do. I know this isn't the kind of law that you do, but what do you think I should do?" And because of who he was and the way that I knew him and the circumstances, I said, "I've never done this before, but I don't think you can afford to hire a tax lawyer. But if you want, I'll do it. I'll try it." So it had already made its way into tax court, which virtually never happens. But because of the inactivity of the defendants, essentially, that's where it got, right? Because they needed a judge to say, you have to pay. Like, you're going to have to do something, right?
Yeah.
So I got involved in the case. I got admitted to tax court. I looked at their tax returns. It was absolutely ridiculous. Their prior tax preparer had died. They were unqualified. They were from a very rural part of the state, right? And so I had, I started working through just with what I know about income tax, working through it. I had a CPA that I work with, make some suggestions. And we ultimately went back and explained to them why the audit should have been way different than it really was. And we ended up paying $21,000, which they then
138.
Yeah. And so this is like an ordinary person who essentially had what we would now call a side hustle, right? The audit was all problems from the little side business. I mean, the guy is a plumber at a prison. His wife is a social worker. They don't know. I mean, they have no, the social worker has a master's in social work, but in terms of running a business or keeping books, they're clueless, right? So this whole mess had happened, and it was really threatening to take their home, and they weren't sure they'd be able to keep the business,
scary.
right? And so that was really rewarding. So, I'm getting more and more into that because it feels very similar to criminal defense, where you're helping ordinary people fight the government.
Right.
And I enjoy.
You're making a difference
Yes.
on that person's life.
Yeah, and I enjoy helping ordinary people fight the government, right? So.
Sounds thrilling.
And it's and so I think that the LLM in tax is going to help with some of the white collar cases I do because they involve all these tax issues and whatever else. And I'm interested in defending people in corporations, smaller corporations, like businesses we would own or our families own.
We're doing all these Camp Lejeune cases right now, and I meet with a guy. He's a Marine, and he says to me, "Mr. King, you got to take down the government, right?" He says, "U.S. government, they don't lose that much." I go, "Well, we go against the government quite a bit.
They lose plenty.
We go against the government quite a bit. We got the elements. They passed the law. We're gonna try to prove your case." He says, "Okay, but we got to beat the government." Okay.
Absolutely. So, I think that I think that in the future, if I want a little bit less stressful litigation, or I don't want to try as many cases, I think audit defense is something I'm pretty interested in. And I've helped a business owner here who had a big state sales tax problem avoid a criminal conviction, and we knocked the numbers down from like $480,000 to $200,000. And I'm dealing with an IRS case right now where they allege that someone didn't declare $4.5 million worth of income. So there's more and more of that stuff out there, and it's a niche inside of a niche, if you will. But those are the kind of things that we get interested in, right? So
I want to talk a little bit about some of it's kind of our relationship. And when I started the law firm, James was the top guy. He was the #1 guy. He's winning a murder trial every 2 weeks. He's in the newspaper, and we knew each other a little bit socially, and we've come a long way. And I think I was 29 years old, and I would just call. I had his phone number, so I would call him up all the time. I've called James. I can't even tell you 1,000 times. He always picks up the phone. You've helped me a tremendous amount, and I know you've helped many, many other lawyers. But what I think. And people call me now.
Sure.
And people continue to call you.
Yeah.
And we help those people, but I don't think that's common in every area. But how do you feel about, in some ways we're competitors. We've worked together, but just kind of your views on lawyers in general and the bar and how we should collaborate, or, I think you get the question. What's your role with working with other lawyers?
Yeah, so I think in general lawyers suck. I think in general, your average lawyer does a very bad job of talking to people like a normal person. Whether they need a will, or they need to start a corporation, or they're getting divorced, or they have a criminal charge, I think that they want you to talk to them like you're a regular person. They don't want to hear legalese. They don't want to hear all these expensive words we learned in law school. They want to, and I think one of the reasons you and I are both successful is we're relatable. We know how, we can talk to people. We didn't grow up, with a silver spoon or a trust fund or whatever else. And so, we grew up around very blue collar, regular people, right? And so, what I like in a lawyer is someone who is doing their best for their clients. They're fighting hard for their clients, and they're treating them like regular people. I mean, the people that you and I represent are already ashamed of what's happened. They're already embarrassed by what's happened. Usually their life is in turmoil. The last thing they need is for the person who is supposed to be fighting for them to be judgmental of them or to talk down to them or to do any of that. So I think in general, lawyers, as a general rule, need to do a lot better job of that. I think this legal community in general and the criminal defense bar, I think people really collaborate well together. I've never been upset if someone took a case away from me. Most people haven't been upset if I've taken a case away from them. I want, whatever client to get the best outcome that they can. And sometimes there's personality conflicts, right? It just means, just recently I had a client who, after a couple of months together, I said, listen, I just want to give you your money back and you can find someone new, because the animosity that we have in our relationship is not helping your case, right?
Right.
So he's like, well, I don't think it's fair for you to give me all my money back. And I said, okay, well, how much do you think is fair? He said a number. I said, fine. I gave him the rest of his money back and said, here's some people you can go talk to. And he hired another lawyer, and they're off doing what they do. I don't know how that's ultimately going to turn out, but I know it's going to turn out better than what was going on between the two of us. So, I think that the criminal bar in Monroe County is very collegial. I think we work well together. I think, if you have information, sometimes you have co-defendants, you have information about, your case that's going to help someone else, people give it to you,
Well, we all have these weird issues that come up, and I know
Absolutely.
I call you, and sometimes you call me. I remember the first time James called me, hey, I want to run something by you. I'm like, holy shit, we made it. But somebody dials you up, your phone rings, your assistant says, James, I got Joe Blow, lawyer on the phone. What goes through your mind? You're like, this guy's my adversary. This guy is trying to take clients from me.
I mean,
I know you take the call, but
Sure.
people wouldn't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, at the point they're calling me about a case, the person's already hired them. So what difference does it make, right? Yeah. And I think that, helping them help their client is the best thing that you can do. And you hope that, in a certain situation, a client comes along for them that's not right for them. And maybe they think of me to send it to. I know you've done that. There's been people who were maybe too close to you. You didn't want to represent them. And you said, James, will you represent this person? Because it's going to be ugly for me if things don't go well, right? Yeah. Or, I'm too busy right now. I'm in the middle of a trial. I can't grab this case. Do you want it? So, I feel like that all that goodwill comes back to you, realistically.
And I think it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do, for
people
sure.
Don't, I don't know, I talk about it at different times, and, we always kind of talk to the younger lawyers or law students or kids that are thinking about law school. And, one of the things that I know you do, and it's something that I've done, and you've been the other side of it, is you ask decent people for help. Usually they give it to you.
Exactly.
So you say, hey, I could use a hand here, and you're a decent person, and you're not asking for too much, people will help you.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you the other thing that I think, if you're talking about advice for young lawyers, the people who are working for the government right now, whether they are a public defender or an assistant district attorney, they're not going to be there forever. So to the extent that you can do something to build relationships with the private bar while you have that job, I'm not telling them to give a better deal than what they can, but if someone needs an adjournment, consent to it. If someone asks you to find out, a piece of information they're looking for, help them out. If you can give them some consideration on a case, do that. Because those relationships, ultimately all you have as a lawyer is your reputation, right? And so, you start building that the first day you start working. And I think a lot of people who are working for the government don't start thinking about that until they're not working at the government anymore. And then it's a little late, right?
Yeah, I got a story. I shouldn't tell it. I shouldn't tell it on here, but I'm going to anyway. I'm like
this is why people listen. These are the stories you shouldn't tell, but you tell anyway.
Well, I'm in my first week as an ADA, and this guy comes out. He's a defense lawyer, pretty well-known defense lawyer, and he wants some deal on a DWI reduction. He says you can't prove your case, and I say, well, I think I can. He says, you don't know what you're doing. This is a short version, but you don't know what you're doing. I'm like, well, I think I can prove the case, whatever. You tell the judge, I don't care. He says, you have no clue what you're doing. And I'm like, listen, I might not know what I'm doing, but I know a cocksucker when I see one. And you can kiss my ass. So anyway, he calls the boss on me. And the boss, little does he know, the boss feels pretty similar about this guy as I do. So I think I got a promotion.
Well, and you talk about all, everything I did to help you, but you and I knew each other well before you left the DA's office.
Oh, yeah.
Because we had a number of cases together back then, and we knew a lot of the same people. I don't
Was
think,
it
I don't think
good, like
we ever,
balance? Like, I don't-
I don't think we ever did a trial.
No, we didn't do any trials. I remember we had a crazy case in Webster. Larry from USA
Yes.
was your client.
Yes.
And Aaron Sperano was involved, and that was early on. But so I'll tell you the first time I met James, Bill Gargan's my boss, and he walks in. Bill Gargan was a boss who I enjoyed as a person, and he says, "Okay, this is how you're going to become a good lawyer." And this is the art of Bill Gargan. He goes, "You're going to go out to Parrington Town Court, and there's a clerk out there. Her name's Jan Spencer. She's had like 30 great prosecutors in a row. And you make Jan Spencer's top 5 favorites, you're going to be a great lawyer." So I go out there and I say, "Jan, I'm going to be in your top, nice to meet you, I'm going to be in your top 5 favorites. You just tell me what I need to do." So she thinks it's funny. She's cool. We're still friends. And she tells me, "Well, I'm going to show you one of the boys in the top 5. He's coming in here today." And here comes, so I think I'm like 26. I think I'm hot shit. Here comes Nobles, like the C parts. He walks in. Jan Spencer loves James Nobles. So I knew who he was. That was like the first couple weeks I was a DA, and that's how I knew who he was. And I knew that Jan was respected. She'd been doing it for over 20 years. She was very well respected by the highest, my boss. Mm-hmm. And she thought James was a really good lawyer, and he had been a prosecutor in that court. He was taking a lot of assignments in the court, so we had several cases out there. And he was smart. So when I was a prosecutor, I go against James. He would ask for 5 or 10 or 15% more than he deserved, but he wouldn't ask for, "I don't want an ACD on a murder."
Right. Right.
He knew how to do it, and he knew how to say, "Here's what here's the reason you should give me a little extra." And I was like, "Okay, good enough." And he would get a good deal, and we would be good.
And I think another tip that I would give young lawyers, young law students, is that I've been a very successful trial lawyer, and some of those cases, some of those negotiations, some of the trials have been extremely contentious. Okay, however, you win so much more if you are nice as long as you can possibly be nice, right? There are times in this job where you have to fight, and it gets personal, right? Hopefully it doesn't stay personal. Hopefully after it's over, it can simmer down. But I have always practiced in a way that I try to be respectful to everybody, including my adversary. I try to explain my position. I try to ask for things instead of tell, until the point where if the person's being unreasonable and we have to fight, then we'll fight. But the reality is, if you save that for 5% of the time, the judge realizes that it's important because all of a sudden you're fighting and you're not a fighter. The DA realizes they're in trouble because they've never seen you fight before, right? Or the witness who's on the stand. I always, even if it's going to be a contentious witness, the first rule is get them to agree with you on all the easy stuff you need them to say, right? Then get into because once you piss them off, they don't want to tell you anything anymore, right?
Oh, yeah.
So be nice, get the easy stuff, and then when we've gotten all the easy stuff you can get, if you have to turn, into an adversary, into a more aggressive position and take that position, then that's what you do. But you get so much more, and most of the time you get everything you want by trying to negotiate, right, and being straightforward.
I feel like I've heard a lot of attorneys, and I think
you've
a
heard
lot
me
of the
tell our
good
clients all the time.
attorneys have a pretty calm demeanor for
Sure.
the most part until they need to be.
Even if we're pissed inside, we don't. You don't let that show, right?
Yeah.
You just
You can
kind
always
of.
become more aggressive.
Yes.
But it's hard to become less aggressive. So
Right.
in day one, and there are the defense lawyers who take that.
Come in
They-
aggressive right from the beginning.
But I feel like I wouldn't take you serious if that's how you come into a courtroom every single day.
And ultimately,
like,
that's what
what's wrong
happens, right?
today?
Right,
You know?
exactly. That's what happens.
Well, I used to say, the clients ask you that sometimes. I say, you get that guy who fights all the time, and let's get his last 100 results.
Right.
And put him right here. And we'll take my last 100, and we'll put him right here.
Right, right.
We'll beat that guy by 9. He might win 1 that we don't win, and we're going to win 90 that he doesn't win.
But I
Right.
also feel like that's stereotypical of, like, people assume that a good attorney is someone who comes in and starts yelling and screaming and
Well,
being chaotic, and that's not
No,
true. That's not the reality.
a good attorney can be aggressive.
Right.
They don't
And
have
there's
to
a
be
time and
aggressive.
place
Right, correct.
and need for it. But,
Correct.
like when you think of an attorney, you go, like you watch a movie.
And
they're
sometimes
always
it
aggressive.
and sometimes it behooves you to not elevate as well, right? So I a number of these murder trials, you're cross-examining the lead detective, right? And so There was one guy who, I was asking regular questions. He started getting really upset, and he's yelling at me. And I'm asking the questions normal. He's yelling back, right? Are you calling me a liar? I'm like, no, I'm just asking you a question, right? So he gets very elevated. And so finally, in front of the jury, I say to him, I said, officer or investigator, why are you yelling?
Yeah.
Look, I'm sorry if I've offended you. I didn't mean to, but, let's try to take it down a notch and see if we can get, and like the jurors thought he was an asshole. Right. Because I wasn't being mean. He was just being mean, right? Like, because he got defensive about something he should have done that he didn't do, and he thinks I'm calling out his competency. I'm just asking him questions in a normal tone and a normal pace and a normal way, but that's how he responded. And so my response to him in that way highlighted the absurdity of it, right? And so then in my closing, I was like, why do you think he got so mad? Right? He got mad because he knew he got exposed for not doing his job right? Like, and I didn't even have to say that in the cross-examination, right? It was obvious, right? Yeah. So even in instances when your adversary becomes elevated and hostile, I still think you don't have to. I mean, sometimes you do. Sometimes you have to do that. But 99% of the time you don't. And I think lawyers, everything on TV portrays us very differently than reality. And I think, if you don't know anything other than law school, you don't have any real experience, you don't know what works and doesn't work, right?
Well, that's the thing. We ask that question to everybody who's in here, and the people who know, we've had some pretty good lawyers in here, and they say, you want to learn, go to court. Go find somebody who's won some cases and just go watch them. Right. And
we all know it now, but it's really disconcerting when you get to bar preparation and you realize that what you were taught in the classes is not actually what the law is, right?
Well, and it has nothing to do with how you get a result.
Right.
You could know every bit of law. I mean, there's lawyers who know way more about the law than me.
And me too.
Tell them to go get a result in court.
Right.
It's also one of the things I don't like about virtual. So when we used to go to court and we would wait for our cases to get called, you would sit there and you would hear the judges talk over and over and over for years and years and years. And you would hear Mr. Nobles make an argument, Mr. D'Amelio make it, and you would see what that felt like. Well, now you do a Zoom call. You never see any of these other people. So all these guys now that we barely go to court.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, you learn a lot by watching other people. I think you and I have learned a lot of what not to do by watching other people, because you see that too, right? But there's no substitute for experience. That's really the bottom line.
Oh, right? Yeah. And experience, it doesn't all have to be murder trial. I know we talk about murder trials because they're cool. I mean, experience picking juries. Most of the jury trials I did were misdemeanors. And guess what? Picking misdemeanor juries, it's still picking juries.
In some ways, it's harder because you have less people you can kick off just because you want to, right? So like on a misdemeanor, you get 3. That's it.
And you get
on a murder, you get 20.
Well, you do a murder, everybody's paying attention. There's a dead guy over here.
Right.
Well, you're talking about
it's a Super Bowl of trials, right?
Right. Somebody stole a bag of chips from the gas station. It's hard to keep their attention.
How much do I really need to pay attention?
Right.
7-Eleven's down a bag of chips.
Right. The guy called his ex-girlfriend, and there was an order of protection. This is a phone call. We're going to put this guy in jail for a phone call.
Why are we here?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
No comment. All right, my last question.
Sure.
How do you keep a balanced life?
He doesn't.
If you do,
well,
what do you enjoy? Because being an attorney, especially in criminal defense attorney, it's heavy, right? There's a lot that's going on. How do you?
I don't mean to talk for you, and I hope you don't take that as disrespectful.
No.
But it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Doing this is, and we went to conference together in Florida, and we're both taking phone calls.
Right.
Like you're
you're
working.
You're never not working.
You've been working 24 hours a day for 20 years.
And the reality of our type of law is that when people need us, it's often at bad hours, and they often need you right away. Right? So, I can remember being on a private beach in the Bahamas on a family vacation. It was before my daughter was born, but I was with my in-laws, my brother-in-law, my wife and her aunt and uncle, and I am taking a call, I'm walking around trying to find the best cell service, taking a call on the beach on a private island in the Caribbean, and every other person there, the other 7 people think I'm an asshole. right? Like, you know,
At least
like,
you get the sunrise
right,
to look at
right,
as you're
right.
going.
I
You
mean,
know?
I remember a white collar case that we did, and we had just settled a big civil case, and I went out with Mike Pattison for a beer,
yeah,
or I think I had had 2 or 3 beers, and Nobles calls me up. I got a co-defendant. You got to get over here right now.
Right,
I'm going
right.
to pick you up. I'm like, James, I've been at the bar for the last hour. He's like, I don't care where you are. I'm picking you up, and
Right.
we're going to help these
Yeah.
people. And I said, okay, well, just
We'll
just
give it
let
an
'em-
hour so
let-
you can
just
get
let
it
them know
together,
where I'm
but,
coming
yeah.
from. And they're like,
So the way that I've gotten to a better balance, because everything that Bob's saying is true.
Right.
The way that I've gotten to a better balance is post-COVID, I've realized I don't need to make the money that I was making before. So I just say no sometimes. And I just say,
Okay.
you know what? I mean, I'm not taking new cases right now. You know, and sometimes that'll go on for a couple of weeks.
Is that
Or-
hard to do, or
it is very. It was really hard to do at all in the beginning. Now it's only hard to do. Like I passed on one case about a month ago that I really wanted to do. It was right in my wheelhouse. It was Medicaid fraud, white collar, involving Houston and Atlanta, millions of dollars. But I knew that if I took that case, I was going to have to be in Atlanta and Houston like 3 or 4 times in the next 2 weeks. And my whole family just gotten over COVID.
Yeah.
It was Thanksgiving. I was tired. I was like, I just like getting
Can't-
on a plane 4 times in the next 2 weeks is just not in the cards for me.
Right.
Right. With everything, you know, we're going into Christmas and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, nah,
which I think says a lot about you to say, you know what, like I could run myself into the ground,
Right.
but it's not.
And it was a
worth
case I
it.
really wanted to do. If
Yeah.
without that, and you know, plus, you know, and quite frankly, you know, I'm looking at the numbers for the end of the year, and I've gone, you know, I had a pretty good year. I don't need to do this if I don't want to, right? And so,
Right.
but most of them are fairly easy to pass on at this point. But if it's a case you really like, it's kind of hard, right? So
You're at a point where you can take the cases that you want to take, and you don't have to take every phone call that comes
right,
through the door.
and frankly, just days also that factored into that same decision. Just days before that, I took a big case here locally. It's a tax evasion case. It's a good fee. It's interesting. So like
it's going to take up a lot of your
and so I
time.
had just done that 2 or 3 days before, right? Which I knew that case was also going to require a lot of immediate attention, right?
Right.
So it was just like I just didn't want to push
So kind
myself.
of
that
knowing your
thin.
boundaries.
Yeah.
It's good advice.
You know, at another time I would have taken it, but it just kind of didn't fit out right.
Yeah.
You know, so
I guess we'll wrap it.
yeah,
I
wrap it
think
up.
it-
We'll wrap it
Thanks.
up. Always grateful. Where can people find you if they want to see Noble's defense?
Yeah, so Google my name, James Nobles, Rochester, New York, is probably the easiest way. My website is noblesdefense.com, NOBLESDEFENSE.com. You know, you'll see me in the newspaper here and there and on TV here and there. What I
You do social media, Twitter?
No,
any
I
of that
don't.
stuff?
I'm done with all
TikTok?
that. Yeah, no. My daughter does, but not me. You know, the other thing. You know, it's interesting. Just as the last note about that, what a lot of people don't realize. I know you get this because you've been in the same position. Everybody always wants to talk about these big cases. Charlie Tan, Darren Venable, you know, Bob Wiesner. I represented Maggie Brooks' husband in the LDC thing. All of that. The truth of the matter is that my very best results people have never heard about because they didn't even get charged. Like we were able to make the case go away.
Dismiss.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I represented a very big contractor in the Bob Morgan $4 billion bank fraud scandal. Never got charged. First day, they were like, "We're going to charge your guy. He should come in and cooperate."
That was the case I went from the bar.
Right. That's the issue from the bar. Right. So like, you know, like, so really, people always want to talk about what they perceive as your really successful cases. The truth is, your most successful cases, no one's ever even heard of.
So would you suggest, if you think that you're under investigation, to hire an attorney sooner than later?
100%, because once you're charged, you can never become uncharged.
Gotcha.
Maybe you get the case dismissed,
Right.
but it still could be
Still there.
on social media or in the news media or wherever else. But you know, I can't say this has happened every time, but if I'm just guessing, I would tell you a third of the time that people come in saying they're under investigation, they don't get charged.
Yeah, I bet it. I bet ours is even
Maybe
higher
50,
than
maybe
that. I bet
50%.
it's- and
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to prevent an arrest than to win a case where a person's been charged.
100%. And so, you know, a lot of people take the tactic, well, I'm not sure I'm going to need a lawyer. Well,
Better to have one than not.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, and some of those cases that people never got charged were really serious cases, right?
Or could have been.
Or could have been,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Good advice. That's great advice just to end with. All right.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We could talk to Nobles forever. He knows a lot about what we do.
That's all right.